In the quiet suburban neighborhood of Maplewood, nestled just outside the bustling city of Portland, Oregon, the Johnsons were the picture of a young couple living the American dream. Mark Johnson, 28, was a rising star at a local tech startup, while his wife Sarah, 26, had recently landed a job as an elementary school teacher. They had moved into their modest, two-story home just a year ago, excited to start their life together in a friendly community. Little did their neighbors know that beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect life, a storm was brewing, one that would ultimately lead to a shocking act of violence that would tear apart not just the Johnsons' lives, but the entire neighborhood. It all began on a warm summer evening in July 2023. Sarah had left for a week-long teaching conference in Seattle, leaving Mark alone in their home. As he stood in the kitchen, absent-mindedly preparing a microwave dinner, a knock on the door startled him out of his reverie. Opening the door, Mark found himself face-to-face with Elena Rossi, their 45-year-old next-door neighbor. Elena, a divorcee who had moved in 6 months ago, was holding a plate of freshly baked cookies. "I thought you might like some company," Elena said with a warm smile, her dark eyes twinkling. "I saw Sarah leave earlier, and I know how lonely it can get when you're used to having someone around." Mark hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside to let her in. "That's really kind of you, Elena. I was just about to have dinner. Would you like to join me?" As they sat at the kitchen table, picking at Mark's lackluster microwave meal and Elena's delicious cookies, the conversation flowed easily. Elena was witty and charming, her laughter infectious. Mark found himself opening up about his frustrations at work and the growing distance he felt between himself and Sarah. "It's like we're living parallel lives sometimes," Mark confessed, surprised at his own candor. "We're both so busy with our careers, we barely have time for each other anymore." Elena reached across the table, her hand resting gently on Mark's. "I understand, Mark. It's not easy keeping the spark alive when life gets in the way." Their eyes met, and in that moment, something shifted between them. The air seemed to crackle with unspoken tension. Before Mark knew what was happening, Elena leaned in and kissed him softly on the lips. He pulled back, flustered. "Elena, we can't. I'm married." "I know," she whispered, her eyes never leaving his. "But don't you deserve to feel wanted, Mark? To feel alive?" What happened next would set in motion a chain of events that would lead to tragedy. Mark, overcome by loneliness and desire, gave in to Elena's advances. That night marked the beginning of their passionate affair, one that would consume them both in the weeks to come. As Sarah returned from her conference, Mark was torn between guilt and excitement. He tried to reconnect with his wife, suggesting date nights and weekend getaways, but the allure of his secret rendezvous with Elena proved too strong. Every stolen moment, every clandestine meeting in Elena's house while Sarah was at work only deepened their illicit connection. But secrets have a way of coming to light, and this affair was no exception. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon in September, Sarah came home early from school, feeling under the weather. As she approached their house, she noticed something odd. The curtains in Elena's living room window were drawn, unusual for that time of day. A nagging feeling in her gut, Sarah walked up to Elena's front door. She was about to knock when she heard it, a familiar laugh, her husband's laugh, followed by the unmistakable sound of kissing. Sarah's world shattered in that instant. Rage, hurt, and betrayal coursed through her veins as she fumbled for her keys and burst through the front door. The scene that greeted her would be forever seared into her memory. Mark and Elena, partially undressed on the couch, springing apart with looks of shock and guilt on their faces. "Sarah!" Mark exclaimed, scrambling to his feet. "It's not. I can explain." But Sarah was beyond explanations. With a scream of anguish, she turned and fled the house, running blindly through the rain, her mind reeling from the betrayal she had just witnessed. In the days following Sarah's discovery, the Johnson household became a battleground of bitter arguments and icy silences. Mark, racked with guilt, begged for forgiveness, swearing that the affair meant nothing. Sarah, her trust shattered, oscillated between rage and despair. How could you do this to us?" Sarah sobbed during one of their heated exchanges. "With her, of all people?" Mark, his face haggard from sleepless nights, pleaded, "It was a mistake, Sarah. I never meant for it to happen. Please, we can work through this." But Sarah wasn't sure she wanted to work through it. The image of Mark and Elena together haunted her every waking moment. She took to sleeping in the guest room, unable to bear lying next to the man who had betrayed her so completely. Elena, for her part, seemed to vanish from sight. The curtains in her house remained drawn, and her car didn't leave the driveway for days. The neighborhood buzzed with whispered speculation about the sudden change in the Johnsons' demeanor and a mysterious absence. A week after the confrontation, Sarah received a text from an unknown number. "I'm sorry, can we talk?" Elena. Against her better judgment, Sarah agreed to meet Elena at a small cafe on the outskirts of town. As she sat across from the woman who had upended her life, Sarah was struck by how ordinary Elena looked. No longer the seductive temptress of her imagination, but a middle-aged woman with lines of worry etched on her face. "I never meant to hurt you, Sarah," Elena began, her voice trembling. "I was lonely, and Mark was kind to me, but it was wrong, and I'm so sorry." Sarah listened in stony silence as Elena poured out her regrets. As the older woman spoke, Sarah felt her anger shifting, redirecting itself entirely towards Mark. It was he who had made vows to her, he who had betrayed their marriage. "Thank you for meeting me," Elena said as they parted. "I'll be moving away soon. I hope you and Mark can work things out." But working things out was the furthest thing from Sarah's mind. As she drove home, a plan began to form, a dark, twisted plan born of hurt and betrayal. That night, Sarah approached Mark with an unexpected calmness. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice steady. "I want us to try to move past this. Why don't we have a special dinner tomorrow night? Just the two of us?" Mark, relieved at this apparent olive branch, eagerly agreed. "Yes, of course. Anything you want, Sarah." The next evening, Sarah prepared Mark's favorite meal steak with a rich red wine sauce. As they sat down to eat, the atmosphere was charged with an uneasy tension. "I'm so glad we're trying to work this out," Mark said, raising his wine glass. "To new beginnings?" Sarah smiled tightly and clinked her glass against his. "To new beginnings," she echoed. As they ate, Sarah watched Mark intently. Halfway through the meal, he began to look uncomfortable, tugging at his collar. "Are you feeling all right?" Sarah asked, her voice laced with false concern. Mark shook his head, his breathing becoming labored. Something's wrong," he gasped, clutching at his chest. Sarah stood up slowly, watching as Mark slumped forward onto the table. "You're right, Mark. Something is very wrong." As Mark's eyes widened in realization and terror, Sarah calmly walked to the kitchen and retrieved a large knife. "You broke my heart," she said, her voice eerily calm. "Now I'm going to stop yours." What happened next was a frenzy of violence that would shock even the most hardened detectives. By the time Sarah dropped the bloody knife and called 911, Mark's body bore the marks of her frenzied attack, multiple stab wounds that spoke of a rage beyond reason. When the police arrived, they found Sarah sitting calmly in the living room, her clothes spattered with blood. "I killed my husband," she stated matter-of-factly as the officers burst in, weapons drawn. The quiet neighborhood of Maplewood was rocked by the brutal murder. As news vans and curious onlookers clogged the streets, Detective Michael Reeves took charge of the investigation. At first glance, it seemed like an open and shut case of a scorned wife taking revenge. But as Reeves dug deeper, he began to uncover layers of complexity that would turn this domestic tragedy into one of the most puzzling cases of his career. Detective Michael Reeves stood in the Johnsons' kitchen, his experienced eyes taking in the gruesome scene before him. The dining table, still set for a romantic dinner, was a stark contrast to the pool of blood on the floor and the crumpled form of Mark Johnson. "What do we know so far?" Reeves asked his partner, Detective Lisa Chen. Chen flipped through her notepad. "Victim is Mark Johnson, 28. Wife, Sarah Johnson, 26, called 911 at 9 p.m., confessing to the murder. Neighbor reported hearing an argument around 9:30 p.m. Reeves nodded, his gaze fixed on the wine glasses on the table. "2 glasses, but only one person drinking. Get these to the lab. priority analysis. As the crime scene techs bustled around them, Reeves and Chen began to piece together the events of that fatal night. Sarah Johnson, now in custody, had waived her right to an attorney and seemed almost eager to confess. "He deserved it," Sarah repeated during her initial interview, her voice devoid of emotion. "I gave him everything, and he threw it all away for her." But something about her demeanor nagged at Reeves. In his 20 years on the force, he'd seen his share of crimes of passion. This felt different, too calculated, too cold. The investigation took an unexpected turn when the toxicology report came back. Traces of a powerful sedative were found in Mark's system, along with an unusual compound that the lab was still working to identify. "She drugged him before the attack," Chen mused as they pored over the report. "That doesn't fit with her story of a heated argument leading to murder," Reeves agreed. "And what's this unknown substance? We need to talk to Sarah again." Their second interview with Sarah yielded more questions than answers. When confronted with the toxicology results, Sarah's composure cracked slightly. I don't know anything about that," she stammered, her earlier bravado faltering. Maybe it was something he took? As they dug deeper into the Johnsons' background, a more complex picture emerged. Financial records showed that Mark had recently taken out a substantial life insurance policy, with Sarah as the sole beneficiary. Interviews with colleagues revealed tensions at Mark's workplace, with rumors of impending layoffs. The case took another twist when Elena Rossi, the neighbor with whom Mark had the affair, suddenly disappeared. Her house was found empty, with signs of a hasty departure. "We need to find her," Reeves instructed his team. "She might be the key to understanding what really happened here." As the investigation intensified, the media circus around the case grew. The story of the young teacher who murdered her unfaithful husband captivated the public imagination. Talk shows debated whether Sarah was a victim pushed too far or a cold-blooded killer. 3 weeks into the investigation, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A local pharmacist contacted the police, recognizing Sarah from the news coverage. "She came in about a month ago," the pharmacist told Reeves. "Wanted to know if we carried some unusual herbs. Said it was for a school project on natural remedies. The herbs in question, when combined with certain prescription medications, could produce symptoms similar to a heart attack." The pieces started to fall into place. Meanwhile, the search for Elena Rossi led detectives to a small town in Nevada. What they found there shattered their preconceptions about the case. Elena was found living under an assumed name, clearly terrified. "You don't understand," she told the detectives. "It wasn't just an affair. Mark and we were planning to leave together. He said he had a plan to start a new life." Back in Portland, armed with this new information, Reeves confronted Sarah one final time. Under the weight of mounting evidence, Sarah's carefully constructed facade finally crumbled. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she sobbed. "Mark told me about the affair, said he was leaving me for her. He had it all planned, fake his death, collect the insurance, start a new life with Elena. He wanted my help to pull it off." The truth, as it often does, proved far more complex than anyone had imagined. Sarah, feeling betrayed and used, had agreed to help Mark fake his death, but at the last moment, consumed by rage and hurt, she decided to turn the plan into reality. "I couldn't let him win," Sarah whispered, her eyes haunted. "Not after everything he'd done." As Sarah Johnson was led away to face charges of premeditated murder, Detective Reeves stood outside the precinct, pondering the twisted path that had led to this moment. What had begun as a simple tale of infidelity and revenge had unraveled into a complex web of deceit, betrayal, and unintended consequences. The case of the Johnsons would go down in Portland's criminal history, a stark reminder that in the world of crime, the truth is often stranger and sadder than fiction.